Hello my crafty friends, in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to make this drawstring pouch. You can make them in various different types of sizes. To make this pouch you need to cut 2 circles, so that's all you need, a circle. So depending on the size of your circle, the size of your pouch will vary. So I've made this mini version as a trial and I thought it was cute, but it was a little bit too small for what I wanted to store in my pouch. But I just wanted to mention that if you want to make a mini version, you can. This one would be good for maybe something like jewelry, if you don't want to lose them in your bag and you're traveling, for example. But I wanted to make a slightly larger version so I could store my sewing supplies or maybe like a travel kit or something similar. So if you want to create this exact pouch in this size, I have a free PDF download. However, if you want to create this pouch in any other size, I'm going to walk you through the steps how to draft your own pattern. It is very simple. So if you are ready, then gather your supplies and let's get started. Here I have my PDF pattern for this pouch, so that is this size, which you can download straight from my blog post. The link is in the description below this video. If you want to create either smaller version or larger version of this pouch, you can easily do that. All you have to do is to draw a circle in the required size. So obviously, if you want to make smaller pouch, make this circle smaller. If you want to create larger pouch, make the circle larger. What I've also done on this pattern is I've added 2 dashed lines. Those 2 lines represent stitching line because we need to create a tunnel for our drawstring so we can cinch the top edge like so. And I've also marked 2 placement for my eyelets, because I like to have a nice and neat finish. If you don't want to use eyelets, you can easily create a buttonhole. So this way you can feed your cord through the fabric. Otherwise, if you just slash your fabric, the fabric may rip while you are using your pouch. So I wouldn't really recommend it. So if you are making your own pattern, you can do the same. So all you have to do is to draw a circle in the required size, then measure the distance from the edge of your pattern to the first stitching line. This will be the top edge. So as you can see, this creates nice and kind of flowy and gathered look on the top. And I've got that on both of my pouches. So depending on the distance from the edge of your pattern to the first line, this top edge will be either longer or shorter. I kept mine 3 centimeters. So if you measure from the edge of the pattern to the first stitching line, this is 3 centimeters. But obviously we have a seam allowance around, so the actual edge is only 2 centimeters long or 2 centimeters wide. Then to create the tunnel for your drawstring, you need to measure equal distance and draw another line around your circle. So I've measured 2 centimeters from the first to the second dashed line. I found this is the perfect measurement, so I don't have to worry about feeding through the cord and I don't have to struggle too much. If you make this tunnel narrower, you may find it really difficult to feed your cord through the entire circle. So just FYI. Once you've got your pattern, then go ahead and cut 2 pieces from your fabric. I'm using 2 different fabric pieces because I like to have this accent color or print picking out. So I really like this look. What I also like to do is to interface the area where I'm going to install my eyelets. So on the wrong side of the fabric, on the outer fabric, so one is from the outer fabric, one is your lining. On the outer fabric, on the wrong side, I mark the position of my eyelets, and I fused a small piece of Decovil light just to stabilize that part, that area, so I don't have to worry about the fabric kind of ripping and fraying when I'm installing my eyelets and then when I'm using my pouch. So you can do that as well. If you want to create more sturdy, more structured pouch, you can interface the fabric with something like woven interfacing. However, I want to have nice and soft pouches, so I am not adding any interfacing to my fabric whatsoever. But that is a choice if you wish to do that. Also, make sure to mark midpoints along each side of your circle and then transfer it to your fabric to ensure you can match and pin your fabric correctly. To begin, grab your external fabric and your eyelets and tools to set them in, and then install your eyelets. If you are not using eyelets, then go ahead and sew a buttonhole on both sides of your circle. So what I'm going to do is to punch a hole for my eyelets and then install them. Once you've got your eyelets installed or you've made your buttonholes, grab your lining piece and place it on top. So you want to make sure right sides are facing each other. Line up your midpoints. Before we clip and sew the entire seam, what I like to do is to actually baste individual pieces and leave a small gap. So we need to leave a small gap later so we can turn our pouch right side out. And by basting a small section along the seam, this will allow you to have a guideline to press the seam allowance under, so you can create this lovely curved edge. Otherwise, if you don't do that, it's quite difficult to create a very nice and smooth edge. So what I like to do is to match my midpoints, so I know exactly how I'm going to place those two pieces together later, and leave a big enough opening so I can turn my pouch right side out. So usually I just take my hand and I make and mark notches where I want to stop. So now I have my midpoints marked here and my notches here. I'm going to take those two pieces to the sewing machine and I'm going to baste between those two notches using 1 centimeter seam allowance, because that is my seam allowance, and I will do them individually. So you are not stitching them together at this moment, you are basting individual pieces separately. Once you've got those two pieces basted, then you can line up your fabric, matching your midpoints, pin or clip those two pieces together. When you are ready, you can take this to the machine and sew the seam. However, make sure to leave an opening where you basted your fabric. So I have my basting stitch here and here. Make sure those two basting stitches are aligned, so don't rotate one of your pieces, and then sew the entire seam. So I'm going to start here, I'm going to sew the seam, and then I'm going to end here. Next, grab your pinking shears or your scissors and trim the seam allowance by half. This will help the seam lay nice and flat once your pouch is turned right side out. So I'm just going to go around the entire panel and trim my seam allowance like so. Since we've basted along the opening, you can also trim the seam allowance. Otherwise, I would recommend leave full seam allowance if you didn't baste the opening like that. Next, go ahead and turn your pouch right side out. I like to use my corner shaper to push out the seam and make it nice and round. Now you can take your pouch to the pressing station and press the seam nice and flat. So I like to start at the opening, press my seam nice and flat. What you can do is to roll the fabric between your fingers to bring the stitching line to the top. Otherwise, the fabric kind of rolls inside. So you want to make sure your stitching is at the very edge of the fabric. And just go slow and press the seam around the entire circle. Okay, when you get to the other side of the opening, what you want to do is to press under the seam allowance using the basting stitch as a guideline. So you're going to have to do that one piece at a time. It's much easier this way. If you want, you can remove the basting stitch. Here we go. I've got beautiful rounded edge on both sides. So now we can take this to the machine and top stitch along the entire circle. Here we go, this is what it looks like. Your opening should be now closed because we top stitch along the seam. However, just in case if you top stitched further from the edge of the fabric and you didn't catch the seam allowance, then grab a needle and a thread and close the opening by hand using a ladder stitch, just to prevent the fabric from fraying and the raw edge from showing up. Now we're going to take this to the machine one more time and we're going to sew the first line of top stitching to create the tunnel for our cord, elastic or a drawstring. So what I'm going to do is to measure 2 centimeters from the edge of my fabric and sew the stitching line. If you want to draw your guideline, do that. I've made so many pouches that I can do that without drawing the first line, but I will do the second line because it is further from the edge of the fabric and I don't have the marking on my machine to keep consistent seam allowance. But for the first one, since it's only 2 centimeters away from the edge, I have a marking on my machine on the plate which I can follow along. So I'm going to do that now. To make my life easier to sew the second line, what I like to do is to actually cut my pattern so I can mark the edge where I need to sew the second line of stitching. So I'm just going to mark center line like so. And what I like to do is to keep half of my pattern as it is. So if I want to use it in the future, I can. I'll just need to fold the fabric in half. But otherwise, what I like to do is to cut the other half along those 2 stitching lines. So let me just show you quickly. So I'll just cut the paper along the center line and then I cut my pattern like so along the second stitching line. And then I cut it again along the first stitching line. So I'm basically leaving the tunnel. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. You can simply take a ruler and measure the distance from the first stitching line to the second stitching line and go around your entire pouch to mark your stitching line. But I found that this is much quicker and easier for me. So this is what I do with my pattern. Then I can place my pattern on top, line up this edge with my first stitching line, and now I can mark my second stitching line. And I just go around the entire circle like so. I found this method much easier and quicker than simply measuring the distance and marking my line manually with a ruler. But you do whatever is more comfortable and easier for you. I'm just sharing my process and any tips that has helped me to speed up the process and to create a nice and neat finish. Here we go. Now that I have my stitching line marked, I can use it as a guideline to sew the seam in exactly the same way we've done previously. Alright, our pouch is nearly finished. All we have to do now is to insert our cord or a rope or elastic through the tunnel. So I'm going to use this cord, and since I've used 3mm eyelets, those eyelets are too small for me to use a safety pin to fit it, or even bodkin. So I found that if I wrap masking tape around the edge of this cord, this is then sturdy enough so I can fit it through the pouch. So I'm just going to wrap that tape around the cord like so. I'm just going to cut the end so it is nice and sharp. And now I'm going to feed the cord through one of those eyelets and go around the entire pouch. So that's going to take some time, so bear with me. If you used different size eyelets, or if you've made your buttonhole, this can be a little bit easier for you if you are using safety pin or bodkin or any other tool that you usually use to fit the cord through the tunnel. But as long as I take my time, I can actually fit the cord like that. Here we go. I got it. All right, I'm going to cut away the other end. I'm going to wrap the other end with the masking tape just in case if I lose it, and also to prevent the cord from fraying, because it has a tendency of unraveling really quickly. And I found by adding masking tape at the end, I don't have to worry about it as much. So I'm just going to wrap the end with masking tape one more time, because we need to feed another cord in exactly the same way, but through the other eyelet. And now I can feed my cord one more time. And again, you're going to go around the entire pouch till we get to the same eyelet. If you feed only half of your pouch, so if you go through one end, through one eyelet, and then go out through the other eyelet, you won't be able to kind of cinch in this pouch properly. So it's important that you go around the entire pouch. If you want to make sure your pouch opens flat like this when you are using it, then you can tie a knot on each end to prevent the cord from going inside the tunnel, and you are done. However, I prefer my pouch to open just like halfway through, so I have a pouch at the end. So I need to make those cords slightly shorter, and that really depends on how much opening you want to create. If you want to create very wide opening like this one, then again you would have to tie a knot on each end, but I'm going to do it a little bit further. I don't want that large opening. I think a bit more. I want the opening just enough so I can reach inside, but it doesn't kind of open completely. I think that would be really good for me. So now that I have the exact size, I'm going to tie a knot on both sides. Here we go. That's good. If you want, you can trim the excess just behind that knot. This is exactly what I've done on this pouch. As you can see, I have my knot here and I've cut the cord. This way I don't have to worry about it fraying. But what I'm going to do for this sample is to give myself a little kind of extra so I can actually grab the cord when the pouch is open, because what I found is that when the pouch is open like this and I don't have that extra, I'm always looking for those knots to grab them so I can cinch my pouch. But if I leave a short tail, I should be able to grab it. So now that I have my second knot, I'm going to cut my cord just beyond that second knot. So again, I don't have to worry about it fraying. And I'm going to do exactly the same thing on the other side. I'm just going to measure where I've made the first knot, so it is same length on both sides. Here we go, and I can cut it. All right, and just like that we finish making our lovely drawstring pouch. So you can see I've got now those tails and it is so easy to close, so easy to open. I actually prefer it. So I would highly recommend leaving tiny tails. I know when you close it that the cord kind of is really long, but you can always just wrap it and close it like so, just for the time being, if you are not using your pouch, so it doesn't kind of like wiggle around and bother you too much. But it never bothers me, so I actually don't mind it. And you can use it even to hang your pouch if you have to, so that's an option as well. And just like that, you finish making your own pouch. Well done! I hope you enjoyed this short tutorial and I hope you enjoyed making your own pouch. I think those pouches are so cute and I can see so many different uses for them. I know I will make many more in the future, maybe in different sizes, because I'm really digging what it looks like. I'm even thinking about making a kind of a full-size bag with kind of this type of a top. It looks so nice. So we shall see what I'm gonna come up with in the future. Let me know in the comments if you enjoyed this tutorial, if you would like to see more videos like this one in the future. And I would love to see your version of this pouch, so make sure to tag me at Allsewpetite on social media. Otherwise, subscribe to my channel so you never miss another tutorial from me. And I shall see you in the next video. Stay crafty, friends. Bye!